Hello there. Hello, everyone. Now, I figured I figured to do something different. Well, today I figured, why not go over the three consoles I like but commercially failed? Of course, I could go over a few things that I love about them. Like, for example, I love the I think it was at the Nokia N Gauge to start off with number three. It was a commercial flop, but I loved it. For one thing, yeah, it was a cell phone, but it was also a video game device. So you could play all your good games on the go, like say the original Tomb Raider and or Pandemonium or yes, Pandemonium for the PlayStation that you could play on the N Gauge. And so you could as well with the original Tony Hawk, but on the N Gauge. That was what I loved about it. But sadly, it commercially flopped. And even Nokia admitted it themselves that they only sold about 3 million units as opposed to the ones that they shipped, and they got the shipping numbers mixed with the actual ones sold. You gotta love that they get that confused. They really love to get that confused. But honestly, knowing that it was actually bound to wasn't bound to be a huge failure, but it ended up being a failure, unfortunately. But it's a shame because it was a good concept. But anyways, moving on to number two, the Sega Dreamcast. Now this commercial failure, I love as well. I mean, oh, and I never went into the how many games does the N Gauge have? Well, in total, the N Gauge had 56 games. Just so we all know, at least in North America. Anyways, the Dreamcast. Right, the Sega Dreamcast was Sega's last console, and I could go into more in depth on Sega as a whole before the Dreamcast, but of course, knowing me, it would take a long time. So for now, we're just going to focus on the Dreamcast. And granted, I love it so much, but here's why. The Dreamcast, well, its library has 600 games, but part of those 600 can be really damn good if you think about it. In fact, dare I say it, a lot of the games for it, exclusive or not, are actually pretty good to play. Like Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Adventure 1, and Crazy Taxi and Jet Grind Radio, you get the rest. And if you were already a Sonic fan at the time, well, you were in luck with the Sega Dreamcast. So, even though those would get eventually ported to the Nintendo GameCube about a year or two later. Or at the very least, yeah, a year or two later. But anyways, yeah, no. That's why the Sega Dreamcast, in my personal opinion, is number two. At least as far as my favorite commercial failures that actually are pretty good, or at least I think are pretty good, despite it commercially failing. And number one is the Sony PSP. Yeah, the Sony PSP is my number one commercially failed console. Well, it's a handheld in particular, just like the N Gauge. But at least the N Gauge also was a cell phone in 2003. But anyways, but back to the not N Gauge, back to the PSP. So the PSP, well, I have one, but I don't know if I'd like to show it. But I'll show it another time. Anyways, for now, the PSP was a pretty good handheld for its time. Didn't matter the model, whether it was 1,000, 2,000, or even the 3,000 models, or even the Go model, or even the E1000, or whatever model that was one was still pretty good. Anyways, no, the Sony PSP is still pretty good, and like the Dreamcast, I ended up playing and or emulating some games, some of its library, but compared to the Dreamcast and N-Gage alone, the N-Gage having 56 and the Dreamcast having 600, nah, the PSP doubles that, like triples that maybe, or multiply that by 10 or something, and you get pretty much the PSP's entire library, which is like a little over 1,000 games in its library, which is awesome to find out when I did my research. about it. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Actually, when I found that out, because I thought but even then, it still commercially failed. Unfortunately, due to lack of support. Not lack of support, but semi lack of support. Of course, it still didn't commercially bomb, but it still commercially bombed to some degree. Comparing it when you compare it to the Nintendo DS at the time and how that was a commercial success. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, what about the PS Vita? Well, the PS Vita is actually pretty damn good, but that one commercially failed. Not the PSP, I would imagine, but it still failed regardless. Yet here I am, not where to go. Anyways, back to my point. So, so back to my point about it, the PSP, right? So the PSP is still a pretty good handheld to me, and that is why it is my number one favorite commercial failure that I really love. Even if even if I honestly even if I love it and yet others don't, or it was really just a commercial failure yet I love it. So yeah, those are my top three favorite ones. What do you think? List them off in the comments below, and yeah, list your thoughts off in the comments below, and yeah, this this has been it for my top three favorite consoles and handhelds that I enjoy and personally love deeply, yet are commercial failures. Thanks for watching.